This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zachariason.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zachariason, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at NumberFire.com, and this is episode 242 of the Late Round Podcast, one of the many shows that are part of the NumberFire Podcast Network. As always, thanks for tuning in. Last week, I released my top 36 rookie rankings over on NumberFire.com. If you didn't see them or you hate reading, then this is the perfect episode for you, because I'm going to go over those rankings with a focus on the top 20. And I'm going to give you more context than I provided in that article so you can understand my thinking where I'm at with these players and their landing spots. So today's a ranking show, and I know how much the fantasy football world loves rankings. Now, before we get into things, I wanted to remind you guys about FanDuel's MLB Home Run Challenge. Enter the free Home Run Challenge contest any day from May 1st to May 30th, where you select any 3 hitters to hit home runs. If your entry has the highest total amount of home runs on the night, you'll win a share of $1,000. And if that's not enough, each daily winner will earn one entry into the $20,000 Home Run Championship on May 31st. For more information, visit FanDuel.com or download the app today. Eligibility restrictions apply. So my 101 in rookie drafts is unsurprisingly N'Keal Harry. If you've been listening to the show over the offseason, you know I love Harry. He's got really good college production, and he has an elite breakout age, and he can play all over the field. And he landed with New England. Now, I've seen a lot of takes about how he doesn't fit in New England's offense and how he's not the type of receiver that they typically get, and how New England's had really bad success drafting wide receivers under Bill Belichick. First off, regarding that last point, this is the first-round wide receiver that Belichick has ever selected. So let's just push that narrative aside. But the second point, guys, do you really think that the Patriots did zero homework and just drafted Harry to draft him? That they don't have any plan at all for what he brings to the table, which is a physical style of play and the ability to play all over the football field? You can talk about separation issues all you want, but how was he able to do what he did in college and put together such a complete profile with these extreme separation issues? The Patriots have very little at wide receiver, and they no longer have a top red zone weapon in Rob Gronkowski. I think there's an easy argument to be made that N'Keal Harry immediately becomes the team's best red zone weapon through the air right away. That's the type of receiver that he is. He checks so many boxes that even if he does indeed bust, a player with his profile and draft capital is going to work out more often than not. So I'll buy into that. I'll buy into the probability. And I'll buy into New England knowing what they're doing and having a plan to deploy N'Keal Harry. So I do have Harry as my 101, but an easy argument could be made to put Josh Jacobs in that spot. Pre-draft, I wasn't high on Jacobs. Even though he split a backfield with another running back who was drafted this year, his production was really lacking in college. In fact, of the 30 first-round running backs drafted since 2006, Jacobs ranks dead last in final season attempts per game, attempt share, rushing yards per game, and rushing yard share. And it's not like he was the only back among those players who was drafted from a crowded backfield. The good news for Jacobs is that over the last 10 years, just 4 of the 15 running backs taken in the first round have failed to give us a season with 1,300 or more scrimmage yards. And 2 of those players were rookies last year, in Sony Michel and Rashad Penny, so they still have plenty of time. And the other 2 were Javid Best and David Wilson. Both of those players saw their careers end early due to injury. So like I said, it's easy to make a case for Jacobs as the 101. At running back, draft capital is a really big deal. And I think the top tier is clearly him and N'Keal Harry in rookie drafts this year. Now, pick 3 in rookie drafts is where things get really, really interesting. There's a teardrop, in my opinion, to the next player. And that next player, for me, is Miles Sanders. I think what's going to turn people off of Sanders is Doug Peterson's tendency to run a committee. That's what we've seen in Philly over the last 3 years. No running back has seen a rushing share higher than 37% in a single season. That's pretty low. And I do expect that to continue to a degree with Sanders there, but let's not ignore the fact that only LeGarrette Blount and Wendell Smallwood have finished a full 16 games for Philly over this time period. They're the only 2 backs with 16 games played. And they're not especially good running backs or backs that would demand to see the field a whole lot. Sanders can play all 3 downs. That's something that the Eagles haven't really had. He was top 5 in this class in final season reception share, and he had pretty good rushing marks. And he's an athlete. So to me, I like Sanders at the top of this tier. But if you need wide receiver help, I think you can go with the next guy instead. And that's Mecole Hardman. I surprised myself when I ranked Hardman 4th in my rookie rankings. But I'm also not going to be super stubborn and not rank him high because he wasn't ranked high heading into the draft. Situation matters. And in Hardman's case, it matters a lot. Hardman had poor college production. He never saw more than 15% of his team's receptions and 18% of his team's receiving yards in a single season. That's not good. But this isn't like a Riley Ridley situation where the lack of production comes with an unathletic player. Hardman ran a 4.33. He's got a ton of speed. And we know what the Chiefs are dealing with right now. They might lose Tyreek Hill. And on a football field, what does Tyreek Hill bring more than anything else? What attribute? He brings speed. I mean, let's just connect the dots here and try to think about this all logically. The Chiefs have no wide receiver depth, so Hardman has a real chance to see the field right away. He's got to beat out DeMarcus Robinson basically if Tyreek Hill is gone. Hardman's got the measurables, and you're associating him with one of the best offensive minds in the game in Andy Reid with the best young quarterback in the league in Pat Mahomes. That's why he's my number 2 receiver in this class. After Hardman comes Paris Campbell. Now pre-draft, I had Campbell as my wide receiver 10. Now he's jumped up all the way to wide receiver 3. Should situation matter that much? I would argue yes, especially with this class, since it didn't have many obvious studs at either of the main positions. Paris Campbell falls to a team with Andrew Luck at quarterback, no firm wide receiver 2 behind T.Y. Hilton, and it's in an offense that was second in the NFL in neutral script pass to rush attempt ratio last year. We know the Colts are going to throw the ball. That raises Campbell's volume potential. And I trust Indianapolis to find use of Paris Campbell. One of my big concerns entering the draft with Campbell was that we just didn't know. We didn't know what kind of wide receiver he was. He's got insane speed, but he also only caught 2 deep balls last season. His average depth of target was low, and with that ambiguity, it was hard to just push him at the top of the wide receiver rankings list. But in Indianapolis, you could make the case that it was an ideal landing spot. That's why I feel better about Paris Campbell post-draft. At number 6, I've got my man Andy Isabella. I still have Isabella in the same tier as Hardman and Campbell, but I would be taking the former before Isabella. Now, as an Andy Isabella truther, I was happy to see him go to Arizona in the second round. He had probably the best college production of anyone in this class, and he has 4.31 speed. So despite his size, he was a really good prospect. And he fell to a team that should be pretty pass-heavy in that Cliff Kingsbury offense with a young quarterback who has a lot of potential. It's a great landing spot. Now, I do think the offense might end up having fairly flat target distribution, but enough pass attempts can make 2 or 3 of the pass catchers in Arizona's offense relevant year in and year out. So I dig Isabella, and I think that he's a safe pick in the middle of the first round of rookie drafts. And you should honestly be able to get him later than where I have him. David Montgomery comes in at number 7, still part of tier 2. Now, I like Montgomery a lot. My prospect model actually has him as the best running back in this year's class. The biggest issue with his landing spot is going to be receiving related. Now, just to be clear, and I need to be clear about this because some Bears fans took it the wrong way on Twitter, but just to be clear, my belief is that Montgomery is a good pass catcher. There are plenty of running backs who can catch passes and be effective there while still not seeing a ton of volume in the passing game, though. That's the issue here for Montgomery. Tariq Cohen, also a young running back, saw over 17% of Chicago's targets last year. And elsewhere on that team, you've got weapons. There are only so many looks through the air to go around. I think David Montgomery is better than Jordan Howard, so please don't take this next piece the wrong way. But we saw what can happen in fantasy with a player who isn't seeing enough volume through the air. Howard, just last season, saw 5.3% of Chicago's pass attempts, and he finishes an RB3 in PPR points per game, because his target share wasn't very high. That's why I think that Montgomery's short-term ceiling, or a reasonable ceiling, without a Cohen injury, is in the mid to lower end RB2 range. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's reason enough for me to put him below Miles Sanders, albeit in the same tier. So that's the thinking here. Next on this list at number 8 is DK Metcalf. There are plenty of question marks surrounding Metcalf's transition to the NFL. You've got the potential lack of agility, issues with his health and staying healthy, somewhat of a lacking production profile. He's not a perfect prospect. I didn't love the idea of taking Metcalf as a first rounder in the actual draft, but Seattle getting him at pick 64 was actually really good value, and the landing spot could be worse. Now, we know Seattle wants to run. Brian Schottenheimer's offense last season was dead last in neutral script pass to rush attempt ratio. That's why even though Tyler Lockett was so insanely efficient last year, he still wasn't really moving the needle dramatically in fantasy football. But there could be open targets for Metcalf with Doug Baldwin's career in question. Not that Metcalf would play in the slot, just that those targets have to go somewhere. And just because there are red flags surrounding Metcalf's potential in the NFL, there's a lot of good too. He's a monster athlete, and you're now tying him to Russell Wilson. So I've got Metcalf in a new tier after David Montgomery, but I think that he's a solid first-round choice. Deebo Samuel comes in for me at number 9. Now, I thought the pick made sense. Samuel's a yard after the catch player, and with zero consistency from their quarterback last season and not a lot at pass catcher, San Francisco is 9th in the NFL in yards after catch. Now, I always figured that Samuel would play the slot in the NFL, though he did show that he could play all over the field in college. But last year, the two receivers who played more than 40% of their snaps from the slot for San Francisco were Trent Taylor and Richie James. They're two guys without a lot of draft capital associated with them. So I think that we could expect Deebo to play in the slot a lot, but we know that Kyle Shanahan likes versatility from his wide receivers. But I do think that right now, Deebo Samuel's a pretty good value in rookie drafts. My number 10 player this season is Kyler Murray. Yes, I did once write a book about drafting quarterbacks late in fantasy football. And yes, quarterbacks are generally overrated in dynasty leagues as well, despite their career length. But this is a situation where there's not many can't-miss players in this year's rookie draft, and if you need a quarterback, Murray in the late first round is totally fine. He's got the dual threat ability for fantasy purposes, and it's in an offense that should feature a lot of passing. So I'm fine with taking Murray around here, around that 10th to 12th pick. There's not a whole lot to say about it, though I do think that you should be a quarterback-needy team if you are targeting Kyler Murray. One of my favorite wide receivers pre-draft was J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, partially because he has an elite first name, and he was drafted by the Eagles in round 2. Now, it's really unlikely that Arcega-Whiteside does a lot during his rookie season. He's competing for targets with Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson, Nelson Aguilar, Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert. There's a lot of competition there. But you've got to look beyond year 1. As soon as next season, Nelson Aguilar could be gone, Deshaun Jackson's going to be 33, and Alshon Jeffrey is going to be 30. So Arcega-Whiteside could start producing strong fantasy results in 2020. And you're getting a wideout who's on a team with Carson Wentz. So don't let the short-term outlook cloud the potential. I'm someone who liked Arcega-Whiteside coming out, but I think this landing spot is better than maybe some others do. And I think A.J. Brown's landing spot was probably my least favorite in this entire draft for fantasy purposes. A.J. Brown could be the best all-around wide receiver in this class. And then Tennessee took him. And look at what Tennessee has. Look at the things that are bad for A.J. Brown. First off, it's the quarterback situation. I think I like Marcus Mariota more than most, but there's plenty of ambiguity there. So we don't know what that might look like in the future. And then there's the offensive philosophy. One thing that's been consistent with Tennessee with Mariota is that they've been pretty run heavy. Over the last 3 years, Tennessee has ranked in the bottom 5 in pass attempts in each of those seasons. And then there's the obvious Corey Davis factor. Now I think it's clear that Tennessee doesn't view Davis as a number 1 receiver. They not only took A.J. Brown in this draft, but they were tied to Amari Cooper trade rumors last year. It was actually reported that they tried to trade a first-round pick for Amari Cooper last season. But there are 3 things in A.J. Brown's way here: the offensive tendencies, the quarterback, and the potential competition. It could take some time for A.J. Brown to get going fantasy-wise. I think he's an awesome player, but I just can't ignore this particular landing spot. And it honestly pisses me off. I was ready to draft A.J. Brown this year, and now I likely won't have that much of him. Another wideout who landed in a rough spot is Marquise Hollywood Brown. Now, I mentioned this before, but with Lamar Jackson under center last regular season, Ravens wide receivers as a team averaged fewer than 17 PPR points per game. That was fewer than 15 individual wide receivers in the league. During that time, Baltimore's pass-to-rush attempt ratio in neutral scripts was 0.63. That would have marked a low that we've seen over the last decade or so if that's what they did throughout the entire season, basically as far back as I looked. Even that Tim Tebow Broncos team in 2011 had a higher passing rate. So I'm scared of Hollywood Brown's volume potential in this offense. Even if he sees a huge target share, it might not matter much. We have to hope that the Ravens become more pass heavy, but I'm not all that confident that that's going to be enough, especially with what we saw from Lamar Jackson as a passer last year. And then there's also the fact that Hollywood weighed in at 166 pounds at the combine. We haven't seen a sub 170 pound wide receiver hit 1,000 yards since 1990. So here's to hoping that that weigh-in had to do with his injury and that he's a little bit beefier than that. But overall, this is not a good landing spot. I see Brown as someone that you can draft sort of as a luxury because there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding him and that situation. Heading into the draft, Hakeem Butler was in my top 3. I had N'Keal Harry first, A.J. Brown second, and Hakeem Butler third. And then Butler fell in the draft a lot. He went at the beginning of the 4th round, and he wasn't even the first wide receiver selected by the team who took him. And that's scary because draft capital matters. teams doing evaluation and not seeing something in a player, that matters. I still like Butler as a player, and it wouldn't be surprising to me at all if he's one of the best wide receivers in this class. But not only did teams not want him, he wasn't some flawless prospect. I think that's important. He had a bad breakout age, and he only really produced during his final collegiate season. So there's not this long resume of production. I think he's a good player to target at the turn in your drafts, though. Like I said, the upside is still there given final season production does matter most. And he was the only Power 5 player in this year's class to score at least 45% of his team's touchdowns while grabbing over 42% of his team's receiving yards. And he's a freak. He's 6'5", 227 pounds, and he ran a 4.48 40 at the combine. And the landing spot isn't so bad. I already talked about it with Andy Isabella, but Arizona should throw plenty of passes and keep 4 wide receivers on the field consistently. So I still got some hope for Butler. His fall in the draft just wasn't very good. This is a good tight end class, but my first tight end isn't ranked until number 15 overall because tight ends just don't matter a whole lot in fantasy football. But that tight end is TJ Hawkinson, who went to Detroit with a top 10 pick. That's just the 4th time since the turn of the century that we saw a tight end go in the top 10. So draft capital alone makes Hawkinson an interesting prospect. I don't know if I really like this landing spot for him, though. In the short term, Detroit's got Darrell Bevell coordinating the offense. And during his 7 seasons as Seattle's offensive coordinator, Bevell's offense is ranked higher than 24th in neutral script pass to rush attempt ratio just twice. And again, in the short term, Kenny Golladay and Marvin Jones are there too. Hawkinson could be the number 2 target in that offense pretty soon, though. And maybe Bevell doesn't create as run-heavy of an offense as I think that he might this year. So from that perspective, we could see decent production, probably more in year 2, given how tight ends translate to the NFL. And by the way, I've got Hawkinson in tier 4, which is right there with Hakeem Butler, but it's here behind Hollywood Brown, A.J. Brown, Arcega-Whiteside, Deebo Samuel, and DK Metcalf, or the group that I just talked about. Right after Hawkinson, I've got Noah Fant. I actually think that Fant could easily outscore Hawkinson in year 1, given Joe Flacco's tendency to target tight ends, or how he has in the past. But also, Fant just might end up being a better receiver in the NFL. He's got better yak ability, and he has more athleticism. I just prefer Hawkinson because he outperformed Fant in college, he has better draft equity, and I think is just a better all-around player. But Denver is without studs at pass catcher, so a role could be carved out right away for Noah Fant. Maybe that's enough to make you lean Fant's way over Hawkinson in your rookie drafts. The Steelers made a somewhat surprising pick in round 3 when they took Deontay Johnson. It was sort of a classic Pittsburgh wide receiver pick. They got an undersized guy who doesn't necessarily have the best athleticism, but he's a great route runner. That's what you get with Johnson. But I have my worries. I want to just buy into Johnson because the Steelers have had success at finding wide receivers in the draft, but in college, he had average production, he had a terrible speed score, and he didn't have a good breakout age. Now, he was playing with 2 NFL-level wideouts at Toledo, so that helps the production argument a bit. But neither guy was drafted. So that means that he was losing market share to non-elite players, and that's never a good thing. If Johnson had gone to most other teams, I wouldn't be touching him. But if you can get him in the early 2nd round, I guess it's worthwhile given it's Pittsburgh. He's the last player in my 4th tier, so he's with Hakeem Butler and the tight ends that I just talked about. So I talked about this last week on the show, but I think LA moving up to get Darrell Henderson is an awful sign for Todd Gurley. This is the first time we're actually able to see action from this team since we saw CJ Anderson split the backfield with Gurley in the playoffs, and the Rams not only trade up to get Henderson, but they spent a pretty pricey pick to get him. I've got Henderson here at 18 because I think he'll see a fair share of work as a complement to Gurley as soon as year 1, as soon as this year. And then there's the upside that Henderson would be more of an every week player if something does happen to Gurley. I do worry about Henderson's ability to carry a big workload, though. He was insanely efficient in college with 2 straight seasons of 8.9 yards per carry, but he was just average in attempts per game versus the other backs in this class. He's just 208 pounds. I like Henderson a lot in this role. I think it may end up being a little bit underrated, to be honest. And at the very least, you're getting somewhat of a handcuff to Gurley with this pick. At 19 and in the same tier as Henderson, I've got one of my favorite value picks in rookie drafts, and that's Justice Hill. I talked earlier about how run-heavy the Ravens were with Lamar Jackson last year, and that wasn't solely because of Lamar Jackson himself. When he was starter in the regular season, so during weeks 11 through 17, the top running backs across the entire league in that split in rush attempts were Chris Carson, Ezekiel Elliott, Saquon Barkley, and Gus Edwards. Only the Seahawks had more running back rush attempts than the Ravens did during that period. I don't expect Justice Hill to take over lead back duties in that backfield, but but he's got great speed and burst, and he could act as a perfect complement to some of those bigger bodied backs like Mark Ingram. And he could end up seeing some work as a receiver as well, though we know that there won't be that much opportunity there as a pass catcher. But I'm very bullish on Justice Hill, and I think that his talent and situation is sort of being overlooked. He wasn't overly productive in college, but he has the athletic profile to overcome that at the next level. At number 20, the last player I'm going to talk about on today's show is someone that I really wasn't into heading into the draft, and that's Devin Singletary. Honestly, guys, I don't get it with Devin Singletary. I just don't. He's a 5'7", 203-pound back who ran a 4.66 40, and he played for Florida Atlantic. And as each year went on in college, he saw his receiving profile get worse and worse. He's just not my kind of prospect. Now, with that being said, Buffalo spent a third rounder to get him, and ahead of him on the depth chart are two geriatric running backs in LaShawn McCoy and Frank Gore, and then there's TJ Yeldon, who couldn't find a team at the start of free agency. It would be stupid for me to not recognize the opportunity for Devin Singletary. I just don't love the talent, but that only matters so much at the running back position. That's why I've got Singletary in my top 20 despite not loving him. Now, I did rank things through pick 36 over on NumberFire, so you can feel free to check that out. You can just Google search Zach Ertz rookie rankings and it will pop up. But I hope you enjoyed listening to me provide some of my process and thinking with these rankings. Sometimes these thoughts don't come across as strongly in article form, so the podcast can help. But that is going to do it for today's show. Thanks to all of you guys for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, TuneIn, Stitcher, and Spotify. And if you're on iTunes, please do me a favor and leave a rating and review. And you can follow me on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Thanks, everyone. I won't have a mailbag episode for you this week because I'll be out of town, so I'll be back in your ears with another episode next week.